Patriots are 1-2, and like I said, I'm wondering could this be any different than years before? By that, I mean that they usually right the ship. I think Edelman comes back and makes this a better offense and makes the playmakers more available that he currently has. I'm talking about Brady. Maybe Josh Gordon does something. Or maybe what's in this book, Belichick, shows you that certain things might not be so hunky-dory within that building regardless of the winning. And if the winning doesn't happen and that deodorant doesn't get applied, maybe something happens to the Patriots this year that often than not. And the author, Ian O'Connor, joining me here on the show. Congrats on the book, Ian.
Thanks, Rich. How are you?
I am great, thank you.
Good.
What's been the reception on this book from?
Well, it officially comes out tomorrow,
Yep.
but I did send advance copies to Belichick and Kraft and the rest up there. I have not heard any word from the Patriots on it, so I don't know what they feel about it. But I do know people who've read the manuscript and advance copies, and the reaction I got for the most part was, I like Bill more after reading it than I did before. So I tried to make it a humanizing portrait of the man and show that side of him that he never shows in public. But it's not easy to humanize someone who doesn't want to be humanized in public. And by interviewing hundreds of people, I tried to do that, and I guess the reader will decide whether or not I succeeded.
So what's the answer to the question, why does Belichick not want to be humanized in public like most humans would probably want?
Yeah, right. Most celebrities, they want to show their best side in public and hide their worst side in private. Belichick does the reverse of that. I don't know. But I think it's all about, he sets that organizational tone with every press conference, and that is, it revolves around the idea of give them nothing more than is absolutely necessary. We are in the business of collecting information, not sharing it. And by setting that tone, he wants the players to see that and act accordingly in the locker room when they're asked questions by the media. Give nothing away. He is the greatest net taker of information of all time, and that involves every conversation about football he's ever had with anybody. He wants to walk away with more than he gives. So I think it's more about that than anything else. But in talking to some of his friends who didn't want to be named, some of them do wish that he would show some humanity at the podium. Because away from the facility, Bill can be charming, he's engaging, he can be funny, he's a lot of things, generous, that the average football fan outside of New England, around the country, would not believe.
No, I mean, because I have been on the receiving end of that generosity, Ian. I was calling the action, however you want to put it, play-by-play of the Combine this year, talking about, how my 40-yard dash in my suit running for St. Jude Children's, research. And all of a sudden, over my left shoulder comes an arm slapping a personal check on my notes, and I looked up over my left shoulder, and there was a smiling Bill Belichick at me. I'm not going to say how much it was, but it was absurdly generous. A personal check from Stephen Belichick. And, it was, from Bill Belichick, and it was something else, Ian. Why doesn't he want that sort of stuff out there, do you think?
And I was watching when that happened, by the way. And, the other thing is that people say he hates the media. He doesn't hate the media. I know he respects you, and he respects a number of people in the profession. He sends holiday cards to certain people. And, again, I think it goes back to when I'm at work, I'm work Bill, and I have no interest in the public knowing that I'm actually a pretty damn good human being away from the office. My only mission when I'm on site is to help my team win football games, and I really don't care what you think of work Bill. My friends know human Bill away from Patriot Place, and that's good enough for me. So I guess there's a certain honor in that, because I've been talking to friends who are like, well, I'd love to tell you all these great stories, positive stories and anecdotes about Bill, but I'm afraid he's going to get mad at me. And I say, well, if you don't tell those stories, they're never going to get out there. Don't you want him to be seen as completely human? And so it's a fascinating question, and I think it all comes back to he doesn't think that helps him win football games, so at work he's not going to do it.
Ian O'Connor, the author of Belichick, senior writer at ESPN.com, here on The Rich Eisen Show. So you spoke to over 300 people for this book?
I did.
None of them Belichick?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, did people who spoke to you giving voice to Belichick's personality and life and behind the scenes, did they check with Belichick before speaking to you, do you think?
Some did, I think, and some didn't. I think some were comfortable enough in their own skin to just talk. But I do know Bill reached out to some people through either directly or using an intermediary and asked some people not to share stories about his life. And that could be personal. I don't know how he feels about me. I infamously wrote a column in 2000 saying it was a bad hire. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it. It might just be that if he doesn't have control of a project, he doesn't want to lend his credibility to it. And frankly, Rich, he doesn't owe me anything. I realize that. I signed up for the challenge of doing this, and so I worked around it as best I could. And the way to do that is to talk to 350 people. And so that's what I did. And I think I wrote the definitive portrait of him. And I'll let others be the judge of whether or not that indeed was the case.
All right, let's get into the Brady of it all here, Ian. Of all the stories in your book that I was able to read through excerpts and otherwise, the one quote that jumped out at me, Deflategate this and obviously Spygate that, is this quote from an unnamed New England assistant when Garoppolo was drafted, said the general feeling among staff members around the time wasn't that Belichick's system could make Super Bowl quarterbacks out of all 32 starters, quote, but if you gave us any of the top 15, we could do it. The assistant added, I don't think the coaches view Tom as special as everyone else in football does. Mr. Kraft thinks Tom is the greatest gift ever, but the coaches don't. That made my jaw hit the floor. What in the world? Do they really believe that Brady is a product of theirs and not their job being secured potentially by Brady's success?
Now remember, Rich, that quote comes out of a period of time where Tom's performance was slipping. His arm strength was diminishing. He had won 3, not 5, and it had been since 2004 since he had won the big one. And in 13, his numbers were coming down. There was an alarming trend to some degree, and that's why they drafted Garoppolo. That night that he drafted Garoppolo, Belichick said he cited Tom's age and contract status, and he said, I'd rather be early than late at this position. And he really fired a warning shot right over his quarterback's head, and Brady knew that. So there was concern there. And not only that, last year in spring of 2017, I had about a 55-minute phone conversation with Brady where we talked about his legacy, and I said to him, are you finally willing to publicly concede that you are the greatest quarterback of all time, that you have surpassed your idol, Joe Montana? And his answer was almost in line with what that assistant told me. And he said, and I understand part of this was Brady humility, but I believe I'm a product of the system. I believe there are a lot of people who, if they were in my shoes, would accomplish the same kinds of things. So, I know people have really grabbed onto that quote, but look at it in the context of the time it referred to. That Tom Brady is not today's Brady, who has 5 rings, another 2 Super Bowl MVPs, and another league MVP.
No, but the quote also says that Mr. Kraft thinks Tom is the greatest gift ever, but the coaches don't. That has nothing to do with diminishing returns or abilities, Ian. That has to do with respect for what he did at that place. And that's crazy talk to me. And I'm wondering if that assistant still is on the staff.
Well, I'm going to go further in identifying people that put their faith and trust in me that I would protect them. And Bill is still very much the active head coach of the Patriots. So that's why there are some quotes in this book, obviously, that people needed some protection on. But I will say that I think the spirit of that quote in talking to that person was not to knock down Brady and treat him as if he were only a top 15 quarterback in the NFL. It was to say, we do realize he is a great player, but Robert Kraft and your average fan may think a little bit more highly of him than we do in terms of his performance or his ability versus the significance of the system, and not only Tom Brady's performance, but everyone who passes through that building.
Well, and here's why I really latched onto it, too, and I think others might have, Ian O'Connor, the author of Belichick, here on the show, is that might be a portal through which we can look at the 2018 season, that if they believed that in 2014 that Brady's not the greatest gift, and all has been gone on under the bridge maybe since then, that we could use that through the portal through which we can review the current relationship between Brady and this organization and Belichick, that it's on rockier status than ever before.
I think, Rich, it's fair to say that. I think it was inevitable that there was going to be a confrontation of sorts, that the moment they drafted Garoppolo, to me, and in talking to people around Brady, people who know him really well, that it was almost as if Drew Henson showed up again in his life, right, going back to Michigan. And obviously he had established a lot more in New England than he did at Michigan, but he waited so long to be the starter. Lloyd Carr then recruits everybody's All-American. Everyone fell in love with Drew Henson, and Brady had to fight him off, which he did. This was the same kind of thing. Now, the system, the Belichick machine, pushed out every made man in Foxborough, going back to Lawyer Malloy through Logan Mankins and everyone else. And it was designed to push Tom out 1 year early rather than 1 year late and give the job to Garoppolo. He outplayed the system and forced the machine to then churn out Garoppolo and send him to San Francisco. So there was going to be this confrontation, and it happened last year. I think the remarkable thing, you've been around sports a long time too, is that it took 18 years for this to come into public view, this fracture in the relationship, that they held it together for as long as they did. And it's been entirely a transactional relationship. There's never been any warmth between the two of them. It's been all business, and it's been the greatest partnership in NFL history, but there was bound to be a meltdown of sorts in that partnership. It happened. They barely survived it, and now they try to win ring number 6 together. And I think they will at some point. I do.
So how do you think the end game does wind up?
I think I don't know if it's going to be this year, and I do think they have one more in them. And I think the narrative then will be, you people, or many of you said that we were done, our relationship was done, and we came back and climbed the mountain one more time. I hope that happens, and I hope I'm there to write that story, because I think it'll be a great one. I could see Belichick at some point handing it over to Josh McDaniels. He convinced McDaniels to stay and not take the head job with the Colts, and he certainly is ready for a second chance. Brady and McDaniels have a really good relationship. So if Belichick wins one more and breaks the tie with Vince Lombardi and decides to be the president of the Patriots or just to retire, I think that's a feasible scenario. But he's a young 66, as you know. He still has a lot of energy. He could coach another 5, 6, 7 years, I think, if he wanted to. He still loves it to death.
Well, one would think that the way that he was looking at Garoppolo, that he saw another guy that he could win for 10, 15 more years with, right? Or somebody that he could coach for as long as he wanted to coach and then leave the situation in a very prosperous way that his legacy would still grow with him no longer on the sidelines, and he could have like a Coughlin role in a way, even though Coughlin was forced into that role because the Giants sent him packing.
Right.
So I guess the last question I have for you on this is everything that you gleaned about the Belichick-Brady relationship, the front office workings of the New England Patriots, all of this. You went back to Deflategate and all the gates. You went through all the gates, okay? is how do you think any of what you learned relationship-wise manifests itself in the win-loss column in 2018, and what happens to see how does it manifest itself, Ian O'Connor?
I don't think they're 1 and 2 because they had this thing and it carried into the offseason, and Brady thought of walking away rather than playing for his head coach one more time. I actually don't think it's related to their record right now. I actually think they're going to be 3 and 2 in 2 weeks, but and then, as you pointed out, Edelman and Josh Gordon, and then I think things will be okay. I do think one thing, the way that Bill coached Tom for 18 years is part of the reason why they had that breakdown in their relationship last year. It wore Brady out. But also, it's the reason why they have 5 rings, because everyone on that roster over time has seen how unforgiving Belichick has been in his coaching of Brady, and that has impacted in a positive way the entire roster. They've been held accountable, Brady at the top and everyone in the middle and at the bottom, to the same degree, and that's the reason why they've won 5, but it's also the reason why it wore Tom out last year. And again, they barely survived it, and so we'll see now if they can get to 6. I do think it'll happen in the next 2-3 years, and then I don't think they'll get to 7, but I do think they've got one more run in them.
All right, I lied. I have one last question for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Ian O'Connor, author of Belichick. Why do you think so many assistants of Belichick's have not had success outside of New England or outside of his warm embrace? You've got Nick Saban, and obviously there's still some other names to be written, stories to be written potentially throughout the NFL. And Saban, you could even say, is an outlier because he's as great as Belichick.
Right.
So why do you think that is?
Well, remember, Rich, when Belichick coached Cleveland, and he admitted this, I believe, right before that first Super Bowl when they beat the Rams, he tried to be too much like Parcells, and he didn't have the charisma and personality to pull it off. Okay, that's why the Cleveland thing, one of the reasons why that failed. I think Mangini and McDaniels tried to be Belichick, and they didn't have the leadership qualities at that point in time to pull it off. They certainly didn't have the record, and I think they failed for that reason. It's hard because you need to be yourself, but on the other hand, you've learned from the greatest coach of all time, so how do you not take parts of that with you, right? So I just think finding that balance of being yourself and also like applying all the lessons you learned from Belichick, and I don't think those two people in particular accomplished that. I think McDaniels, unlike Mangini now, will get – Mangini had 2 shots and failed. I think McDaniels will succeed the second time around, much like Belichick succeeded after failing to try to be like Parcells in Cleveland.
How about this? And I say this with the utmost of respect because I do think Belichick's the greatest of all time, that maybe having the greatest gift at quarterback helps too.
Oh, there's no question about that. But I will counter that by saying, and by the way, I went to the high school where Vince Lombardi coached in New Jersey, St. Cecilia's, and so I'm a big Lombardi guy.
Nice.
But you can't. I mean, if John Wooden didn't have Lou Alcindor and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, if Joe Torre didn't have Mariano and Jeter, you could say that about everybody.
Sure.
So,
right.
So the great ones need great players to prove their greatness. So. Yes, you're right.
I don't know.
I'm
telling you, man, that quote from that unnamed assistant, my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, you've got it. And I understand you're talking about when it was said and the circumstances when it was said. But that's still, I mean, you could even have said in 2014 Brady had cemented status as the GOAT in that way too.
Well, but Rich, how about what Brady said to me on the phone last year? He said, now he didn't say it as strongly as the assistant said it, but he said similar things himself. That unless you just want to say that's 100% Brady humility, but I'll send you the quote, and I'll email it to you and take a look at it.
Great, you got it, Ian. Congrats again on the book. I look forward to reading it cover to cover.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
You got it, Ian O'Connor at Ian_O'Connor on Twitter. Belichick.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.